EU refuses to subsidize Ukrainian grain exports. Kiev seeks financial aid from Brussels after the collapse of the Black Sea grain deal. The European Commission has stated that it lacks the funds to subsidize Ukrainian grain exports, and there is opposition to the idea from some EU member states, as reported by Reuters on Thursday. In the previous year, Brussels had removed tariffs and quotas on Ukrainian products to support the country in its conflict with Russia. In July 2022, Russia had agreed to provide safety guarantees for commercial ships transporting Ukrainian grain via the Black Sea. However, the deal fell through earlier this month, as Moscow did not receive the promised relief on sanctions related to its own food and fertilizer trade. In response to the loss of the Black Sea route, Kiev is seeking compensation from the EU to cover some of the transport costs through the so-called solidarity lanes, which transport Ukrainian products via the EU. According to Reuters, the Ukrainian government sent a letter to EU Trade Chief Valdis Dombrovskis last week, requesting financial aid for this purpose. The requested compensation is estimated to be between $30 and $40 per ton and is intended to cover the price difference between the cheaper Black Sea route and alternative routes. Last year, approximately 40% of Kiev's grain exports were transported through the now-defunct maritime scheme. Since the establishment of solidarity lanes in May 2022, over 45 million tons of goods have been shipped. Regarding the Commission's challenges in finding a solution to support grain transport, a source told the news agency, people have been scratching their heads since last year. It is possible that additional funds could be allocated after the midterm budget review, which may take several months. However, there is opposition from some EU member states to the proposal, citing the dispute over the current partial ban on exports of Ukrainian grain to the bloc. 5 Eastern European member states experienced mass protests by farmers due to the influx of cheap Ukrainian food products that flooded their markets and drove down prices. In response, in May, they pressured the Commission into approving temporary prohibitions, which they had already imposed at the national level, and receiving compensation for affected agriculture producers. The restriction is set to expire in mid-September, but the group intends to extend it until the end of the year. Ukrainian President Vladimir Zelensky criticized this effort as un-European and urged Brussels not to yield.
Ending the Ukraine conflict also means saving lives in Africa. AU Chair Azali Assoumani has called on all parties to free up grain and fertilizer exports from Ukraine and Russia. Ending the Russia-Ukraine conflict would mean saving thousands of people who rely on grain and other produce exported from the Black Sea region, according to African Union Chair Azali Assoumani. He made this statement on Thursday during the opening of the 2-day Russia-Africa Summit in St. Petersburg. Assoumani, who is also the president of Comoros, emphasized the need for peaceful coexistence between Russia and Ukraine and urged the revival of the 2022 grain shipping deal. I have no choice but to notice today that with the Russia-Ukraine crisis, the future of this partnership will be under threat should the crisis persist. Therefore, we need to find a resolution to the crisis in order to try to save the thousands of people who depend on these imports, Assoumani said, as cited by YN News Network. Earlier this month, Moscow declined to extend the internationally brokered deal struck in July 2022 to facilitate the resumption of grain exports from Ukrainian ports, which had been previously interrupted by the fighting. The Kremlin has stated that Western countries have failed to hold up their end of the bargain by not removing obstacles to shipments of fertilizers and food from Russia. While these exports do not directly fall under Western sanctions, Moscow insists that wider restrictions placed on Russian banks, logistics, and insurance render the shipments impossible. President Vladimir Putin has expressed Russia's readiness to immediately return to full compliance with the grain agreement if its concerns are addressed. Speaking in St. Petersburg on Thursday, the Russian leader pledged that Moscow will deliver grain for free to some of Africa's poorest countries.
Yeah.